Hi everyone, I hope you had a good weekend. Tonight and tomorrow night we are going to tackle firm costs. This is the Krugman Module 55. I've decided to break it up into two nights because there's a lot of material here. And the first night we're going to handle just definitions and derivations of the graph. So you can tell how the graphs are made and what the various numbers are that go into it. We're also going to study equations, make sure we're very clear on how all of this stuff is defined. Tomorrow night we'll go into interpretation of those graphs, understanding why they're important and understanding what they mean to an individual firm making decisions. Let's start with just a review of the fact that firms have many costs. Some of them are fixed costs and some are variable, and I have here some examples of fixed costs and variable costs. Now remember, firms consider total cost, which is fixed cost plus variable cost, when they want to understand all the inputs that go into their business as they make decisions. Firms also consider marginal cost. As you'll recall, marginal cost is the cost of producing an additional unit of output, and average cost, so the total cost over quantity when deciding what to produce, how much to produce, and whether to stay in business. I thought tonight too it would be useful to add a page or a slide that's just definitions and equations. If you'd like, you can pause and take a look at all of these definitions. They're pretty straightforward. I've included the equations where they're necessary. Just get used to seeing these, understanding what they are, as they will be important when we're interpreting graphs. The first graph we're going to look at tonight is a pretty straightforward total cost curve. And that, of course, as defined in the previous page, is simply fixed cost plus variable cost. And in order to graph the total cost curve, we look at cost against the quantity of output produced as a result of those cost inputs, in this case, quantity of bushels of wheat. Now, we can also look at total cost and marginal cost next to each other. And here you have on the left, we've gone from the example of bushels of wheat to actually salsa production, where we have total cost on the far left, so that's the cost of producing in this particular business, and then quantity of salsa on the x-axis. So you'll see as the number of cases of salsa increases, the total cost increases, not surprisingly, in accordance with the normal total cost curve. You'll see also that total costs are increasing on a case-by-case basis, therefore making the total cost curve slope upward. On the right you have marginal cost, which is simply the cost of an additional case of salsa that's produced. Consider total cost as a function of both fixed cost and variable cost, and add another element into it, which is marginal cost. Again, marginal cost is defined as simply the additional cost associated with whatever that additional product is that you've made. So here you can see in the cost at Selena's Gourmet Salsas, you have fixed cost, then variable cost, total cost, and marginal cost of a case. Now, if we take that information, we can start by summing it all up and we get the average total cost curve. So by summing it all up, I mean summing the total cost, so fixed cost and variable costs, and we get an average total cost curve. The two important things to take away from this particular chart. The first is you'll notice the sort of swoosh shape, and the swoosh shape in the average total cost curve is very typical. And here's why. If you look at the first point on the graph and then the second point on the graph, you'll see a significant decrease in average total cost. And again, remember, average total cost is total cost divided by the number of units that are outputted. This decreases significantly because what you're doing is taking the fixed cost portion of your input and you are now dividing it, instead of by 1, you're dividing it by 2. Then you're dividing it by 3. And what happens is something called the spreading effect. You are spreading that fixed cost across more units of output. As you increase the number of units of output past what's called the minimum average total cost point, you start seeing, again, an increase in the average total cost curve, and that increase is due to something called the diminishing returns effect. The diminishing returns effect simply exists because, as we've seen before in the case of diminishing returns, each additional unit of labor or each additional unit of input that is used to create more and more outputs has less of an overall return than the units before it. And that's why we get this increase in the average total cost curve. So spreading effect dominates here from the beginning down to the minimum average total cost. And then you have the diminishing returns effect impacting the curve as you move beyond. We've seen that total cost can be broken down into its fixed and variable components. So can we do the same with average total cost. So we can take average total cost and divide it out into average fixed cost and average variable cost. When we look on a graph, it ends up looking something like this. You'll notice on the very top you have marginal cost. Then you have average total cost, average variable cost, and average fixed cost. Keep in mind that average total cost is simply the sum of average variable cost and average fixed cost. And it makes some sense as you look at these two curves. If you were to add up the values of this curve and this curve, what you're going to get over the run of the entire curve is the average total cost. Again, spreading effect dominates here in the earlier units of output, and then you get upward sloping direction in the graph because you have diminishing returns, both in the marginal cost case and in the average variable cost. And when you put these two graphs together, what you're going to get is the average total cost curve. We're not going to worry about what this all means right now. I just want you to spend this evening getting comfortable with these various graphs and the definitions of the numbers that go into each of those. Now, we'll take another step and discuss the marginal cost curve and the average total cost curve and why we know that if the marginal cost is below the average total cost is falling. You can see average total cost curve here. And then where if marginal cost is above the average total cost is rising. And you can see that here as well. Don't worry about this for tonight and its significance. I just want you to be able to recognize how these two graphs relate to one another. Last, we'll take a quick look at marginal cost, average total cost, and average variable cost. It has marked here that increasing specialization leads to lower marginal cost. We're going to talk more about that tomorrow. Then it says, but diminishing returns set in once the benefits from specialization are exhausted and marginal cost rises. Well, yeah, that's part of the definition of the marginal cost curve, and you can see again the swoosh effect. For tonight, all I want you to do is be able to recognize what marginal cost means, what average total cost means, and average variable cost. Tomorrow night we will get more into the significance of these graphs, their shapes, and these 2 points of intersection, which will be important for us in understanding how firms make decisions. That's it for tonight. We will use these same slides tomorrow night. I may put a couple of extra definitions in, but in quick summary, remember these definitions and the equations that go with them. Derivation of the total cost curve against the marginal cost curve, numbers that go into the total cost curve and the marginal cost curve, why the average total cost curve goes down in the early units of production, hits the minimum cost output point, and then increases or slopes up as we get higher in output. Inputs to the average total cost being both average fixed cost and average variable cost, what those curves like when they're broken out, so what the average total cost curve looks like when it's broken into average variable cost and average fixed cost, marginal cost and average total cost, and why we have these spreads and understand why we're sloping downward here and why we're sloping upward here. And last, the marginal cost, average total cost, and average variable cost curves. That's it. Have a great night, and I will see you tomorrow in class.